Good morning, everyone. You hear me okay? Good. Welcome to chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. Today we are going to look at chapter 1, but also have, you saw as you came in there, the handouts, there is a reading from chapter 1 and chapter 2. Why in the world would we put two chapters out there for us to consider? Any ideas? It's the same story. Did I hear that? Yes. They're both, chapter 1, chapter 2, stories about creation. They are similar in some ways and remarkably different in others, but both of them are stories about creation. You could say the first 11 chapters are about cosmic, world, universal history. And then after that, it becomes more about the history of a particular people of Israel. But that serves as the creation stories as context for everything else. However, we often, by we I mean Gentiles, I'm sure Jews never do this, we often take the first story, in the beginning God created stuff, and evening and then day and so on, and then the second story, and the proper word is conflate or smush them together. And they are not the same story, yet we do that all the time. Christians do something very similar with something called Christmas. We take stories from Luke, shepherds, angels, hallelujah, glory to God in the highest. What else is in there? Mangers, no room at the inn. And then we take Matthew, which is wise men seeking the Christ child, totally distinct stories, not at the same time, and we put them all together. And then we add things like the animals. We have a camel and sheep. That's not in the story. There's a manger, a feeding trough, so we assume their animals are there, but they're not in the story itself, so we add to it. We take different sources and push them together, and we come up with this composite, but sometimes it's really good to look at, to analyze, what does the story itself say? Why is it there? Why is the second story there? And how are they in dialogue with one another? So that's why we have both chapters 1 and 2. We'll focus on chapter 1 today, but have that chapter 2 we'll get maybe next Sunday, maybe the week after, and look at those. We'll also have, we won't go through verse by verse, but through the story and then come at different themes that will come out over and over. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? What does it mean to have dominion over the earth? Issues of science and religion. All those different things one could say are embedded in the story, and we'll come back to them. But if you have questions, by the way, all the time, please do raise your hand. Rabbi, would you please lead us in prayer? Have you memorized it yet?
Oh, we never wrote it out.
Will you write it out in Hebrew for them? That would be very helpful. Okay.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'dotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We thank you, God, for commanding us to immerse ourselves, to engage with these sacred texts. Okay, let's jump into Genesis.
Do you have a reader for it?
Do we have someone who'd like to read this page for us or get us started? Want me to do it? Oh, please. Okay.
Who's going to do it? I missed it. Margaret? Come around.
As you hear the story or as you follow along with it, I'd like you to identify as it's going along anything that catches your imagination or your eye or prompts a question on your part. As we read the story, which will be familiar enough, but will surely provide us with much to discuss that maybe you hadn't thought of or that we can point out that would have otherwise been overlooked. So as we read along, will you share with us? Yes. That's what I want you to keep an eye out for. What's interesting and what's curious to you?
In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. And then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit, with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit and the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be lights in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth. And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the dome of the sky to give light upon the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light and the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning on the fourth day.
I think there's a back, right? Vanessa, you want to read the rest? Great job, Margaret.
And God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky. So God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, of every kind, in which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things and wild animals of the earth of every kind. And so it was. God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and the cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish over the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, see, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And every beast of the earth, and every bird of the earth, and everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he'd made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished in all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation.
Great, thank you both. Thoughts that immediately come to mind?
Why is evening put before morning?
Good. So what we're going to do this morning, as we look at this text, is we're going to find ourselves sort of telescoping between details like that and then larger concepts. We'll sort of go in and out, right? Why it was written that way, I can't tell you. I can tell you what came of it. That is to say, the reason that in Judaism, the day begins at sundown, we know that with regard to Jewish holidays, right? We think of them, they begin on sundown, then go into the next day, and it can be a little bit confusing if you ask what day is Yom Kippur, whether you're going to announce the day of or whether the evening before. But the reason was because the ancient rabbis determined that because this was how this story is spelled out, there was evening and there was morning a first day, evening and morning a second day, that it's conclusive that the day, as it were, begins with sundown. Now that sounds strange to us, but if you appreciate for a moment, if you did something at 1 a.m. and then describe it to someone the following day, you'd be forgiven if you referred to it as last night or this morning, even though we appreciate the day began at 12:01. If you're watching the news about this government shutdown that's looming, 12:01 is when it happens, right? That's when the day commences. But most of us don't consider the day beginning at midnight, particularly if we're still up at that time, but we think of it when the alarm clock goes off or when we open our eyes for the first time in the morning, because that's how we organize our thinking. So I can't explain to you exactly why it was that the divine author or the rabbis or the ancients that wrote this story chose to organize it that way, but it strikes us as strange, but it's as sensical as anything else, it seems to me, and that we need a convention by which we can decide when things begin and when things end. Yes?
I was thinking, having just created the light, you're in daytime, so
It would seem so.
the next thing that comes is not going to be more daytime, it's going to be night again. So
There it is.
not crazy.
Could you repeat that for this?
Repeat it for us.
No, for your,
Oh, for my microphone. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The statement was that, repeat it for me. I want to make sure I get it.
That having just created light, launching the next thing that follows is nightfall, until the evening comes after light.
Well, that might suggest that we start with the morning and go into the evening. It's just as sensical, right? I mean, we just need a place to start. What I want us to appreciate in terms of where we start is that the opening verses of Genesis, of our shared Bible tradition, right, begins with this, with the idea that we're speaking of the history of the entire world. Jonathan mentioned that we're going to get to, in a number of chapters, the story about the people Israel. But the story begins, the Bible begins with a story of creation, which is essentially, if you will, God's calling card, the creator of the world. We don't yet have God as lawgiver yet. We don't have God as redeemer yet. We don't have other moments in history that are going to come forward and give, if you will, God an opportunity to demonstrate what God does. Here we start with the idea that we have this universal story that's not particular to Jews or to any other particular ethnic or religious group, but we've got this story about how the world came into being. Right? Yes, Richard?
To switch a little bit, although, the whole wisdom of starting with evening is you start with rest and then you work. But,
That's nice.
in our culture today, that says a lot about first you rest and then you work, rather than first you work and then you rest.
Okay.
But what struck me for the first time was it's a vegan world. Me too. He gives
say that for the microphone.
all the animals, the plants to eat. They don't get to eat each other, which makes me think of the peaceable kingdom in Isaiah, where there shall be no more hurt and destroying on all my holy mountain, comes back to the original intent of creation. It's a vegan world.
It's a vegan world, is the comment. Right? We don't know about flesh eating yet, right? We haven't been assigned the animals to eat. That follows after the flood and Noah. Yes, Vanessa.
It's very methodical.
Yes.
First you have light, okay, then we're going to need water, and then it builds everything step by step to get to the point that life of humans and animals can exist and be supported.
That's right. This story is a very structured story, right? It has a repeating pattern of how things happen. There's a logical layout. You know when a day is finished being described because it says, and God said it was good, there was evening and there was morning. And it's a coda. And then you go to the next one, very structured. And it culminates with the idea of God resting at the end of creation, even if God began resting before engaging in the work, which we know the 6 days of creation capstone is the seventh day, which we understand to be a Sabbath, which also suggests that it's a later text. If you remember the phrase, the documentary hypothesis is biblical criticism wherein the understanding is that there were various texts, or sources of material. And usually those are referred to as J, E, P, and D, because they refer to aspects of this material. J is Yahweh, or Jehovah, or we pronounce it as Adonai when we come across the Hebrew. But if God is referenced as that particular name, then it's from a particular strain of source material. And when God is referred to by a different name, it's from other material. This material of chapter 1 is considered P, priestly material, because it builds, and it's a more sophisticated story, and it builds and culminates with the Sabbath. Significantly, nowhere else in Genesis is there any acknowledgement or recognition that anyone knows anything about the Sabbath. So having come across this story early, the first story, wherein God works for 6 days, if you will, and then rests on the seventh and sets it aside, and then we know about Sabbath traditions, how that's grown over the centuries, such that we have a notion of what we do when it's time for Sabbath, or what the seventh day of rest is about. But significantly, this is part of the biblical critical idea, is that this is a later story written by a priestly tradition to justify the certain organizational structure of the priestly class, of the religious elites, but no one else in Genesis knows anything about this story, it seems. Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, none of them know anything about or don't behave differently on the seventh day of the week than they do on the first or second day of the week, which also suggests that it's an older text. What else do you glean from this? Yes?
Well, this may be way out there, but we define a day as a full rotation of the earth.
Right.
Yet God established a day 4 days before we had the sun, the moon, and the earth.
Right.
Is there a difference in God's day and our day?
So this is first tackled in the 12th century by a rabbinic scholar named... Oh, I'm sorry. I'll repeat the question.
There you go.
Good. The question was that this story says, measures time in days. We understand today that a day is a rotation of the earth as it makes its way around the sun. Is the notion of a day, as we understand it, a 24-hour period, which itself is sort of an estimation, right? We know it's not exactly 24 hours, which is why we have to make calendrical adjustments every 4 years. But Rashi, who was a 12th century commentator, answers your question and says, no, the day for God is very different than our notion of a day. A day could be an epoch, or could be an eon, or 1,000 years in your sight, O Lord, is the idea. So we're cautioned again since the 12th century of reading this text literally as an historical account of what was created when, and does it make sense to go 3 or 4 days where there's already light but we don't have a day, or this kind of idea. It's meant to explain how this world came into being, and is using a very structured narrative to suggest, much in the same way as when you or I create something and we go through various steps. Think about following a recipe, right? Or the steps, or the order of operations in a math problem. We do it in a certain way, and then we get the answer that we have. You were going to say?
Yeah, what Steve brought up is a very important point, and that is, I think, illustrative of what particularly Christians, I'll speak for a very long time have gotten really bent out of shape about, is the issues of science and religion, and that one of how many, is it 24 hours a day to God? Did it literally happen like this? Oh no, what about evolution? Where are there dinosaur bones? I mean, all that stuff you get into. If we approach the story that way, as literal scientific fact, we will miss most of what it's trying to say, and then be very upset trying to somehow make it fit with a contemporary scientific worldview. How have the Jews historically interpreted this story? And let me say one thing before that. So get ready, Rabbi Aaron Bisno. We approach this story secondhand, in a sense, as Christians. It is our story too, but it was first the story of the Jewish people. So how somebody has an experience and interprets that is completely authentic, relevant, and so on to the Jews. and then how we have also adopted the story. It's completely authentic and relevant how we do, but maybe we could learn from the people who had it first to get past some of the hang-ups that we have had. If you look at this other way as, oh my God, these people have already had this problem and learned how to deal with it, maybe we could learn from their family history too and get on with our own lives. So how have the Jews interpreted this story in light of scientific knowledge and so on?
So a number of years ago, you may remember that in Dover, Pennsylvania, there was a big issue within the school district about whether to teach creation science and what should happen with regard to the Earth history class or the Earth sciences curriculum in this particular school district. And I remember preaching on Rosh Hashanah morning about this creation story and essentially saying that we Jews, don't read it as an historical account, or we don't expect that this particular account of creation will match up perfectly with the scientific record. We read it as a theological text, a morality tale, that which we can understand something about our relationship to the world, or what it means to be here for a certain period of time with a set of responsibilities to caretake or to steward the earth or to do various things such that we can pass it on to the next generation. We're not reading it as a clear account of what happened day after day after day. So we're reading it a bit more expansively, or we're suspending disbelief. Stephen Jay Gould, the late professor at Harvard of anthropology and zoology, referred to science and religion as non-overlapping magisteria, that they come to answer very different questions, right? The scientist looks through the microscope and will tell you about the cell, but can't describe why we find that beautiful, or what the purpose of life is other than replicating ourselves, that idea. The moral dimension comes from the religious sphere, such that when God, what does it mean, for instance, if you look at the days of creation, for 5 days, everything is referred to as good, and at the end of the 6th day, having created humanity in this story, it's described as very good. What do we glean from that? And if you were to sort of imagine the sermon you might write about what that distinction is, that a categorical distinction? Does it suggest something about who humans are? Or, is it just sort of a scribal error such as it is, and we don't want to put any more significance into it than that? What does it mean to suggest that human beings were created in the divine image? What follows from that? What is the impetus for creating a story or implanting that bit of theology into a story? There are layers upon layers as to how we read this story. Thoughts about any of that so far? About what it means? Yeah, Richard.
Is there a variety among the different branches of Judaism in the approach to that story? I mean, do the Orthodox look at it the same way?
Essentially, yes. However,
Repeat the question.
the question was, is there a difference or difference in opinion or split opinion across the Jewish world? Do Orthodox Jews, the most traditional, the most literal-minded, right, do they understand this the same way as does the Reform rabbi, the liberal religionist? And essentially the answer is yes. Essentially it's the same thing. They're not reading it in order to pass the PhD oral exam in biology or earth science, right? It's not meant to be read as a text like that, but that there are truths within it, right? The other thing that's important to appreciate, and we have this long ago, this is in the 13th century, Maimonides, who describes the fact that everything that's described in the Torah, or everything that's part of our revealed biblical tradition, is itself an effort to explain what's going on using language and images and metaphor that we can appreciate. That is to say, why the days? Because we understand that notion. Whether it's one day, could God not do it in a day? Sure. Could God do it all in a day? Yeah, we'll stipulate that. But it's described in such a way because we know what it is to work day after day after day, and we know what it is to want to build some rest into that schema, right? It's meant to justify what's already happening, but we read it not as a history, but rather as theology. What is our relationship to the rest of creation? What does it mean to be created as the capstone or last? Or what does it mean to culminate in a day that's set aside for appreciating the rest of the work of creation? Want to jump in?
Sure. What are the questions? Thus the heavens and the earth were finished in all their multitude, and on the seventh day God finished the work he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work he had done in creation. What does it suggest to have a Sabbath for us? If God can do it, and oftentimes God is the creator, we are the creatures, the part of creation made by God. Is that a model, or is that saying don't do it at all? Obviously, it's a model. What does it mean? I wish it, often we come to a Bible text, I wish it said something, but that's not there. And God said you should rest, and you should go to church, and you should give in your pledge because it's Stewardship Sunday. That's in my version of the Bible. Is that not in yours? Doesn't say have church, have synagogue, community. Because they, as you said, the early followers, Jews, Abraham and the rest, didn't know that tradition. But it's built in from the very, very beginning that there is some type of rest. That, I think, suggests, at least to us, that we organize our lives around that principle as well. And what does God do on the Sabbath? Or how is God to be on the Sabbath? Let me ask it this way. What was the work that God did that God is resting from? Creation. And how did God describe... much of what I do, or a teacher might do, it's hard to see direct results. You teach, you preach, you visit people, and somebody's life was changed or not. If you are, I like to garden for a variety of reasons, partly because I put the seed in the ground, it got sun, it got water, I put fertilizer on it, it grew, I weeded, I pruned, I harvested it. It's very satisfying to have like a physical product at the end of that. And then best of all, for example, is we had a gazillion tomatoes. That's not a scientific number, but hundreds of tomatoes that we got to eat. It was very satisfying. And I would call that good. And so what does God do on the Sabbath, the resting time, is perhaps, and this is in obviously human terms, to consider all the things that God has created. And what does it mean to say, and it was good, that humanity was very good, that all these other things, plants, animals, and so on, were good? When we say it's good, how do you interpret that? It's an evaluation, yes. Margaret? Taking heed of what has been done. If this is a strange way, yes. That it could get better, true. Karen?
I have a question. Mine would be, historically, what was going on when the Sabbath started up here?
Let's come back to that. Okay. When God says this part of creation is good, this one's good, and then humanity is very good, is that a moral evaluation? I have examined your life, Ian, with the book of judgment, and I've noticed all these naughty things you did. Oh dear. And there are all these good things. I guess he's good. Is that what it means? No. Think, Vanessa. that is much closer to it. So she said it's when there's a sense of orderliness. If you go in the kitchen, this is like a summer project or it's been raining a week project, and you pull everything out of the cabinets and dust and clean, and it's like, oh God, now I got to do the junk drawer. And then you put everything back, it's good. It's satisfying. It's eerily similar to people put, here's the meal I just cooked, and here's the photo of it on Facebook. There's a sense of admiration. It's good is more of an aesthetic evaluation than a moral one. It's lovely, it's pleasing, and it's not just, bam, I did these things. And notice this version of creation story, chapter 1, is God intimately involved with this creation? How does it happen? Is this a potter fashioning a cup? This is pretty far removed. God said, God spoke these things into existence. So there's a bit of a distance there, but there's a sense of this is pleasing, and I, as God, am still in relationship with it. There's value to this, and that the creator and creature are bound up together forever from the very beginning. All those things are in there rather than, this is morally good or morally bad. This is pleasing and beautiful and lovely, and it's a delight to God that you are created. And that's the thing. All the creation is good, but sin is there somewhere, right? No, not in that. Am I missing something? Not in the story. And then people, humanity, are very good. The best part, the crowning achievement, if you will, of all that. That's how God wants us, at least according to the story, to understand people as very good. Now, are some people better than others?
In whose eyes?
Not according to the story. In whose eyes, as Steve said. Everybody is judged the same. Aaron, do you want to add anything there?
I was going to, I liked...
I want to come back to, there's one thing I want to say before we come back to Karen, but please go ahead.
No, I like this comes about good. And Vanessa, I appreciate what you had to say a lot about what the notion of good is. I'm thinking of a child helping put together a recipe and knows that the next step is to dump this ingredient into the mixing bowl. And you can imagine having declared, okay, I dropped the chocolate chips into the bowl. You can imagine the one who's overseeing the recipe might say, good, okay, right? It's appropriate. That was the next step. That's what was required. That's good in that way because that's the next thing needed to happen is one way of understanding this evaluation, right? In order to have day and night, we need the sun and we need the sky. In order to have, it's good that this happens in this way. Of humanity, clearly the story is suggesting something is qualitatively different with regard to the evaluation, right? And we can talk about what that is. The other way to understand it is that it's good, it's very good, but it's an ongoing process of creation, right? This idea that creation was completed or finished once and for all time and everything else is what follows echoes the idea of God as a watchmaker. Right? One of the images of God creating the world and then setting it in motion or putting it on the shelf is analogized to the watchmaker who creates a watch or a clock and then having done it, puts it on the shelf and doesn't require anything more of the watchmaker. Right? Is that the relationship here? Or is this an ongoing process of shared responsibility, which is typically the way the Jewish tradition has understood it, that we're in relationship with God. We imitate God in the creative processes or in tending to that which God has created, but it's an ongoing nurturing partnership, is how the Jewish community has largely read that, read that story.
Well, I was having trouble finding what I was looking for because our translation changes the meaning so much. The humankind is how we translate it, is very good. I'm on the back page, third paragraph. Then God said, let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and so on. What is the word, Rabbi, in Hebrew for humankind?
Adam. Yeah, Adam.
Adam, which sounds like what? Adam?
Adam.
So this translation is what we use on Sundays. It's called the New Revised Standard Version. This is a very good translation, but it tries really hard to make it gender neutral all the time, and we can miss what the story actually says, which is says Adam. And Adam, so God created Adam, means humanity, not the man in this case, not a proper noun or the first person's name. But right here it means humanity, because it makes no sense, according to our likeness, and let them, it's plural, have dominion. Adam means all people, and there's a sense of a community, is probably even a better word that we might have. It refers to all people are created in God's image. Later we get to male and female, and it gets very confusing because the same word Adam is used. Here's a really fun thing. Adama, if you've ever seen the Battlestar Galactica second series, that's the commander, that's what I think of. Adama is the root of Adam, and the word Adam, it's a play on words. Adama means what?
Earth.
Earth.
Clay.
Dirt. So you people are formed of the earth from the dirt. We would say in our tradition, at the end of life, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, that you return for the place from which you came. And so all that is in there. Something I'd forgotten for 30 years. Ish means a man, and Isha means woman, but Adam means humanity. So when that's there, you see humanity, remember that word is there. So I find that stuff fascinating.
Before you jump,
Yeah.
I want to give a little bit more in terms of the word origin. The word Adam, or Adama, is the earth. Adam, or Adam, is how we tend to translate it. Even within that word, dam is the Hebrew word for blood. And
For what?
Blood.
Blood.
Right? Blood. Dam. And putting the aleph, or the A, in front can be understood as taking this word ish, which begins with that word, or isha, same essential word, taking the aleph, the first letter of that word, and putting it and dam, and you get Adam, right? So this is to say that Adam, or Adama, or Adam is essentially flesh and blood, right? We're talking about the essence of what it is to be in this bag of bones that we walk around in, right? We're flesh and blood. That's what it is. And actually that becomes an idiom later in the rabbinic tradition for contrasting a real-life person with the idealized, right? They often say, the rabbis, a king of flesh and blood said this in the following, right? A king who's of flesh and blood, as opposed to the divine king in heaven, is powerful, as we know human beings can be powerful, this king of flesh and blood, but is at base a human being. Right? So just within the words, within the Hebrew, it's a fascinating language and how it builds in these ways, and there are echoes of other pieces. Jonathan's 100% right that when we refer to the creation of human beings or creation of Adam, we're talking about the creation of humanity. Again, this is another marker that this is a more recent, it's ancient, but a more recent story than is the next one we'll look at, which is much more of a just so story. Right? Such that we have a man and a woman with fig leaves and grappling with discussions and questions about whether they should behave this way or that way, what are the consequences. This story is from a much higher level, looking down and describing how the world itself came into being. And who are these human beings, who are we, such that we seem to be in charge, or we at least have faculties that the rest of the animal kingdom doesn't possess. Right?
Karen,
Please.
So when did the Sabbath, where did it come from?
When did the Sabbath come into the people, the tradition, such that we have an organized structure like that? During the priestly period, which is to say, I don't know how to date it exactly when those practices began, but as the kingdoms are combined and worship is centralized in Jerusalem, that became the order of the week, as it were. Not the order of the day, but the order of the week.
So was that when this was written, or was this written before that?
No, this is likely from that epoch, or that era, right, to justify the Sabbath.
And that's pre-exile.
That's pre-exile.
And is there not a sense that, I'm remembering,
And the exile was 586 BC.
these stories start to get codified in the exile as a way of responding to not only being in exile and the danger of disappearing, but also refuting the other understandings of gods and creation
Yes.
around them.
Right. We're talking about, when this became codified, when this became practiced. We should say something about, I'm going to get you. We should just say something quickly about the notion of a 7-day week. If you know how to read the sky, you can go outside at a certain time, right? And you can determine what time of year it is. If you know how to read the constellations, if you understand about the angle of the sun and the length of a day, and you can plot where we are on the annual calendar. And if you watch the moon, at least for a lunar calendar like the Hebrew calendar, you can get a sense of where you are in the cycle of that month. But there's no way to determine with natural occurring celestial happenings, as it were, there's no way to know that today is Sunday by looking to the sky. There's no way to know what's Wednesday. There's nothing that tells us that. And so this notion of timekeeping, a 7-day cycle, is itself a more sophisticated way of organizing, right? Someone has a vested interest in making sure that we all understand today is Sunday, such that we show up at work tomorrow morning, right? I mean, we need to have a common understanding. So it was a later convention organizing the Sabbath or organizing the week around a Sabbath that was dictated and governed by the priestly class. I don't have a particular date to share with you. Yeah.
Daniel
yeah,
had a question next.
Yeah, please.
I'm struck by the fact that in the creation story, separation seems to be a big theme. Light is opposed to darkness, or these heavens, or earth, and the waters seem to be distinctive, to find themselves in opposition to each other. So I'd like to know when it says male and female created he them, whether how this bears on the issue of selective gender identity, transgenderism, and does orthodoxy, and how does Reformed Judaism understand that? How does Orthodoxy understand it? Can you elect your sex?
Right. Okay, so the question was, everyone hear the question? The question was, essentially, as the capstone of creation in this particular chapter culminates with the creation of human beings who are described as male and female. God created them. What does that suggest with regard to gender or selecting gender? Or was the first human being hermaphroditic? Was there more than one created at a time? What does that mean? Has given rise to lots of conversation, and lots of ink has been spilled over trying to get a handle on what these terse verses actually are telling us. And there's a range of understandings about what that is. The rabbis in the Talmudic period understood that there was more than a binary in terms of gender. As to whether or not one could claim that or one was assigned that, I don't know those particular politics within the wider community, but there was a greater open-mindedness in terms of, I think, accepting creation as it presents itself, rather than needing to fit creation into certain various boxes. Does that make sense? I think that's sort of become our convention. I would say this, however, in this. I mentioned Stephen Jay Gould before. Stephen Jay Gould described that what distinguishes human beings from the rest of the animal kingdom is that we like to make categories. And we like to make classifications. And we like to say, you're in this group and you're in this group because of whatever qualities or assignments such that we know who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down, who's there, who's here. That's what human beings do in contradistinction to other animals, said Stephen Jay Gould. Which is just for a little humorous aside, Mike Royko, who used to write for the Chicago Sun-Times, said that what distinguishes human beings from the rest of the animal kingdom is that we wear underwear. Both seem to be true. Both seem to be true. Okay, there are other questions.
I'm just observing that in Exodus, the Ten Commandments, keeping the Sabbath days in there. So I'm surprised
So right. So the question is that the Ten Commandments know something about the Sabbath. We're told to keep the Sabbath in one place, to remember the Sabbath in another place, right? Which is why we understand those texts, those Ten Commandment texts, to also be traditions, right? Priestly traditions in terms of organizing. And it's a caveat to us, or it's a caution that we should be careful about reading these stories as chronologically correct, as opposed to something that comes from a later tradition that's put earlier. If you look at the story of Joshua in the book of in the book of Joshua, Joshua's detailing of Israelite history up to that point, Joshua seems to know nothing about the experience at Mount Sinai, receiving the Ten Commandments. So some scholars have suggested that's a much later story that becomes part of the Exodus narrative in order to, if you will, anchor God as the one who's calling the shots, making the laws into that story. But whether or not the generation that actually left Egypt arrived at Mount Sinai and had the experiences described in Exodus, or whether that was a later text that got woven into this story, is itself an open question. Right? Someone, maybe you saw it on Facebook this past week. I saw it a number of times. Someone pointed out that 100 years from now, people are going to have a hard time distinguishing between a butt dial, right? When you in error, your cell phone dials something because it's in your pocket, a butt dial, from a booty call. Right? When you go to meet someone for a sexual activity. And that 100 years from now, how will they know the difference between those two idioms? And that it's sort of funny, but we have the same problem as we try to go back and read these stories through our lens, right? So we want to be just a little bit humble and hold it a little bit lightly with regard to the notion that we can completely understand this because it's written in English and we speak English. Or we've read the story many times, right? There's much that gets lost in here, or that we just simply don't appreciate that is out of generational or chronological order. All right, sorry. In the Jewish tradition, God would not have a body, would be incorporeal. What is the image? What is the likeness? The question is, we have a God in this story who's incorporeal, who's without body. And Jewish tradition doesn't make images of God or representations of God. Therefore, in that context, what does it mean to be created in the divine image? Here, we are physical beings, each of us very similar and infinitely different, right? Unique in those regards. What does it mean to say that each of us has been created in the image of God when God lacks for a physical image, right? And traditionally, typically, it's been understood that that has to do with our creative powers. That has to do with our innate goodness. That has to do with qualities that are quite distinct from our physicality, but that we are godly, or we can behave in those ways. It also elevates the notion that every human being, howsoever they may look or behave, or what your feelings are about them, is also, as are you, created in the divine image. And then what does that demand of us? If we were to understand that every person's face into which we look, right? We lock eyes with someone, we're connecting at a level, if we allow it, right? If we allow it, that speaks to this shared sense of divinity. That's the plumb line that runs through it, right?
One last thing. I need to go celebrate communion in 7 minutes. Tonight is the beginning of Yom Kippur. Rabbi Aaron Bisno is leading this wonderful opportunity to observe Yom Kippur. I'll say that it's a 1.5 hour session instead of hours and hours like can often be done. This is like on Ash Wednesday, Ashes to Go. So you get the full thing if you go to Yom Kippur for an hour and a half rather than how many hours would it normally be in a synagogue?
Most of tomorrow.
Most of tomorrow. So you're all invited. Would you tell us briefly what Yom Kippur is?
So Yom Kippur is understood as the Day of Atonement, the culmination of the first 10 days of the Jewish year. So 10 days ago, we celebrated Rosh Hashanah, and it's the day on which we set aside time for taking an accounting of our own souls, of ourselves, the ways in which we want to be different, better tomorrow than we were yesterday, and is an impetus to us to address, to redress whatever may be between us and anyone else that we may have hurt, or the frictions that come with living and sharing together, and it gives us an opportunity to address those relationships too. It's really, it's beautiful music. I think the sermon is pretty good. You'll tell, if you're there, you'll tell me, and I hope you'll think it was very good. You'll let me know if it's very good. Very good. Good.
So you're saying you saw that it was good?
I saw that it was good. I'm hoping you'll see that it's very good. Okay. Thanks, everybody.